Hello and welcome to the Apologists Angle. For today, October 22nd, 2024, an AI-generated Christian cultural apologetic perspective on today's news. This podcast is based directly on the writings of the Christian cultural apologists discussed, but like all AI, it can make mistakes. In the news today, a study published in the Lancet Child and Adolescent Health found that millions of teenagers in Africa may be suffering from undiagnosed asthma. The research, which involved 27,000 pupils from 6 countries, revealed that over 3,000 reported asthma symptoms, but only about 600 had a formal diagnosis. Many children missed school or had their sleep disrupted due to wheezing. Experts attribute the rising rates of asthma in sub-Saharan Africa to rapid urbanization and air pollution. The study's findings highlight the urgent need for access to medicines and diagnostic tests in the region. Commentary inspired by the writings of Christopher J.H. Wright, The Hidden Epidemic, Unveiling the Moral Imperative of Healthcare in Sub-Saharan Africa. As the disturbing news story of millions of undiagnosed asthma cases among African teenagers unfolds, it is tempting to dismiss it as merely a public health crisis. However, Christopher J.H. Wright's work on Old Testament ethics reveals that this issue cuts to the very heart of human dignity and our collective moral responsibility. The biblical emphasis on care for the vulnerable and marginalized, as highlighted in Old Testament ethics for the people of God, is not simply a matter of individual charity, but also a binding obligation of the community and its leaders. The staggering scale of undiagnosed asthma cases in Africa, with over 3,000 reported symptoms, yet only about 600 formal diagnoses, serves as a jarring reminder that healthcare is an essential aspect of promoting human dignity and flourishing. It is our collective duty to ensure that everyone has access to adequate healthcare, as Wright argues in The Mission of God. The fact that many children are missing school or having their sleep disrupted due to wheezing is not just a matter of individual suffering, but also a searing indictment of our societal failure to prioritize the well-being of the most vulnerable. The prophets of old condemned those who neglected the poor and vulnerable, prioritizing instead their own interests and wealth. Today, we face a similar moral reckoning in sub-Saharan Africa, where rapid urbanization and air pollution are exacerbating the asthma epidemic. We must confront the uncomfortable truth that our globalized economic systems often prioritize profit over people, leaving behind a trail of environmental degradation and health crises. Wright's emphasis on God's people being called to care for one another, particularly for the most vulnerable among them, including those suffering from illness or disability, offers a compelling framework for addressing this crisis. It is not enough to simply provide individual charity. We must also work towards systemic change that addresses the root causes of health disparities. The news story highlights the urgent need for access to medicines and diagnostic tests in sub-Saharan Africa. However, this is not just a matter of resource allocation, but also a question of moral priorities. As Wright argues, it is our collective responsibility to ensure that everyone has access to adequate health care. This requires a fundamental shift in how we approach global health, one that prioritizes the well-being of the most vulnerable and recognizes the inherent dignity of every human being. Ultimately, the hidden epidemic of undiagnosed asthma cases among African teenagers is a clarion call to moral awakening. It is a reminder that our collective actions have consequences for human dignity and flourishing. As we respond to this crisis, let us be guided by Wright's vision of a community that cares for one another, particularly for the most vulnerable among them. Only then can we hope to unmask the true face of this epidemic and work towards a more just and equitable healthcare system for all. Thank you for listening to today's episode of The Apologist's Angle. Be sure to come back tomorrow for a new take on the day's news from the perspective of Christian cultural apologetics.